Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carrot Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2010 action thriller comedy titled From Paris with Love. Now, From Paris with Love runs for 92 minutes long. It is directed by Pierre Morel. The script was written by Adi Hassak. Is produced by India Osborne, based off of a story by Luc Besson. It is composed by David Buckley, the cinematography by Michel Abramowicz, and it was edited by Frederic Thoraval. And the stars of the movie are John Travolta, Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, Kasia Smutniak, David Gasman, Richard Durden, Yin Bing, Amber Rose Revah, Eric Godon, Francois Bredon, Chems Dahmani, Sami Darr, Julien Hagnary, Mostefa Stiti, Rebecca Dayan, Michael Vander-Meiren, Didier Constant, Alexandra Boyd, Stephen Shagov, Mike Powers, Nick Loren, Farid Elouardi, Melissa Mars, Hang Yin, Frederic Chau, Tam Solo, John Kiriakou, Luc Besson, and Kelly Preston. So when it comes to action films, the first thing that comes to mind is escapism. It comes in full effect. Sure, we have the art house films to tell a compelling story and something for us to gravitate through in the end. And then we have musicals which tell its narrative through song and dance. However, it's action films that we come to see in the theaters for heart-pounding, energetic sequences that will shock you, excite you, and make you come out with a smile on your face. From Paris with Love nails the action genre to absolute perfection by showing us what evil is lurking on the horizon, and from there it just takes off and never once does it meander. This movie kept me entertained during its 90-minute duration of non-stop thrills, spills, chases, explosions, espionage, you name it. It was that exciting. Would I consider it great cinematic? Would I consider it a cinematic masterpiece? No. I mean, in spite of its big budget, it actually lost at the box office. It made $52 million in the box office, or at least around that area, and it actually came out with $52 million during its run. So I don't think they actually capitalized in their investments in this movie, so I don't think there would have been likely any chances in hell that a sequel would have took place. Was the script good? Far from perfect. It was actually pretty bad, believe it or not, the script. I mean, it excited me. There was a lot of great action. There was a lot of great humor. I was never bored once in the movie. But I think that if it wasn't for John Travolta, this movie would have been rendered sort of in the category of being a B-movie action film that could have done something just taken straight to direct-to-video type of thing, or made into a TV movie. But however, though, it did get the green light in the theaters. And though it didn't capitalize, and I think it actually struck out at the box office, and the reception was not the greatest. And for rightful reasons, too. This is not an Oscar-winning movie. This is not going to change your life. This is not going to be awe-inspiring. But at least, it had something for me to keep myself occupied for the next 90 minutes. And once the action goes off, it never once looks back. Sure, it may not make you any more smarter after watching this, and that's not entirely a bad thing. Excuse me. The roller coaster ride will surely make your head spin, so I advise that you watch with absolute caution. Oh, the action just really goes nonstop. It kind of reminds me a lot of those old cop movies that you had seen that came out in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. A lot of adrenaline, that's for sure. And sure, it runs on a by-the-numbers agenda. This movie definitely pays homage to the action films from the 80s and 90s that made Schwarzenegger, Stallone, and Willis famous as they tracked down bad guys and took them down through chases, shootouts, fights, and lots of chaos and destruction. And boy, do we get a lot of that. The action is spontaneous, but the results are satisfying. This movie really, really lived up to my satisfaction expectations, and it did so absolutely, positively, flawlessly. I really, really did enjoy this movie for what it is. I'm not going to say it was a great script or a cinematic masterpiece or something that's likely that was going to be Oscar caliber, but I don't think it really ever had any intentions or any interests in it. And sure, some people might even say the movie could be borderline in terms of being racist because, but most of the bad guys in this movie are either Asians or Middle Eastern Asians. And it seems like the protagonists are the token white guys. But still, nonetheless, if you could actually ignore the whole identity politics or just suspend your disbelief and not let it worry you and not take the narrative too seriously, then there's something to like about From Paris with Love. I'm not sure if the movie was meant to be kind of like a spoof of the James Bond movie From Russia with Love. Oh, except for instead of being set in Russia, we're in Paris. And I don't know if this whole ideology is a racism against Asians, be it Far East or Middle East. But or was it because of maybe French people have this kind of stereotypical belief that all Americans are Islamophobe, so they decide to make the villains either Muslim, Middle Eastern, or Oriental? Because that's kind of the impression you get. I mean, once you get into the story, that's kind of like what the narrative is about. And yeah, okay, maybe it might offend some. But if you could realize that this is a movie that's not to be taken seriously, like I said, this movie actually has some levels of comedy, albeit dark comedy, albeit offensive, but that's the basis of comedy. Comedy is actually meant to be offensive. And if you can't take that, then there's just no hope for you. I'm sorry to say that. You can't take life too seriously, folks. It's okay to just sit back and suspend your disbeliefs and just enjoy the ride for what it is. No need to make a fucking scene about the slightest things that will offend you. And if you don't like the movie, fine. You don't have to watch it again. In fact, you don't even have to watch it at all if you really want to look into the plot and realize that there's something out there that will offend you. If there's something out there that will offend you, here's my advice. Just don't watch. That's all. You don't have to. Nobody's pointing a gun at you, telling you to watch it. And if they do, I'll come over and I will see to it that I will break whoever it is who's pointing a gun at you, their fucking legs. And I don't care. I don't care who it is. You don't have to be forced to watch something you don't want to watch. But just don't have to ruin it for everyone by getting offended. No one's stopping you. The fast-paced story is truly a Luc Besson vintage penned film. Although French, his films seem to have a special place towards American audiences. His movies are usually in English, and he does take a liking towards the familiar names as his top billing performer. In this case, his choice is a rather unusual one from two-time Oscar nominee John Travolta. And though, yes, Travolta is an A-lister and has been in a few action films in the past, he isn't really conventionally an action film star. But here, yes, he is definitely throwing in his interaction film persona very well, similar to the likes of a Bruce Willis or a Steven Seagal or a Jean-Claude Van Damme. I guess that they couldn't find these people. Travolta decided that, hey, if I want to still continue to be on the wavelength of actors or to make a little bit of a comeback for myself. I mean, I know that at around this time, I know he kind of suffered the grief from the death of his son, Jet. So I think maybe he just needed some kind of a distraction or some kind of way to rectify himself. So then I guess he just arbitrarily decided to star in this movie regardless of the outcome. And I'm not saying that John Travolta did bad in this movie. In fact, he was the one that you actually do look up to, because he's the only one who actually has a lot more character than any of the other bland wooden performances, to be honest with you. I mean, he was probably the only reason why this movie was really that good. From watching this movie, he's actually looks like he's having the time of his life, and he doesn't really give a flying fuck about Oscars. He's just having the time of his life. And that's what's so great about this movie. I mean, complete with his bald visage and goatee to actually solidify and make himself look like a genuine badass. He kind of resembles WWE wrestler Stone Cold Steve Austin, with a little bit of that Austin type character going for him. A menacing, no-nonsense anti-hero type. And sure, he looks menacing and proud of it, but his determination is very admirable. He's still out to do very good, even though he has to bend the rules and sometimes has to do underhanded things just to emerge triumphant. Beeson also remembers that Travolta was in a little film back in 1994 called Pulp Fiction. And in a cheeky display of humor, which is probably maybe the only scene where you get a little dosage of light humor, when a couple of leather jacket-clad men came by and gave him a paper bag, and when James Reese, played by Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, asked what's in the bag, it turned out to be a Royale with cheese from McDonald's, because, as you all know, in France, they don't call it a quarter pounder. It's a Royale with cheese. So a little bit of some cheeky humor thrown in there for good measure. But other than that, the movie is very dark in its delivery and its content. And sure, we get the familiar 80s traditional buddy film with the same odd couple pairing of the straight-edge special agent and the more unhinged manic one as they tear the streets of Paris looking for baddies and organizations to take down, all for the sake of justice. I mean, these guys kind of remind me of Riggs and Murtaugh and Tango and Cash and the likes. So Jonathan Rhys-Meyers is James Rhys, who works for the ambassador of the United States as his assistant. He's currently in training to become a secret agent, but right now his assignments are pretty menial at best, including going into some kind of embassy and sticking a bug underneath the desk with chewing gum, which doesn't really come quite well. In fact, he even goes so far as to try to staple it, which is mostly played off for comic relief, even though it probably came off more awkward than funny. He spends most of his days, however, playing chess with his superior, and back home he is snuggling with his fiancée Caroline, played by Kasia Smutniak, who at first you may think of her as being just some one-dimensional girlfriend in the moment type of thing, but then we realize that, well, as we go along in the narrative, we realize that Caroline is anything but one-dimensional. In fact, we realize that she's not all the sweet charmer that we are all led to believe. Sometimes there's more to meet the eye. Things pick up in a hurry, however, when James is assigned to go over to sort of like a section in the airport, a customs section, where he is to meet veteran secret agent Charlie Wax, played by John Travolta, as he tries to smuggle in energy drinks. But what was inside the energy drinks was, let's say, a little weapon that he calls, I think, Emily. I don't know. Something like that. I don't remember. Anyhow, yeah. Charlie Wax is just some crazy-ass motherfucker who is not afraid to carry guns, and he's not afraid to stir trouble wherever he goes. Oh, and if he happens to pull a trigger, let's just say there is a certain purpose for it. So basically, Wax is pretty much designed to just do all the killings, while James is hired as his driver and a guy to pick up as much evidence as he can. Not really involved in a lot of the killings or the fight scenes, but basically mostly serving as a bit of a supervisor, seeing things from his perspectives about his partnership with Charlie Wax. They barely ever had time to fully introduce each other, because right away, once they start to pair up, it never looks back. At first impressions, we're led to believe that Charlie was assigned to eliminate a band of drug smugglers who were involved in the murder of the Secretary of Defense's daughter. Oh, sure, there are drug smugglers out there, but it's not for that reason. It was all just a ruse. Who he's really going after is a terrorist organization aiming to invade the American embassy armed with explosive devices hidden from their burqas. I'm sure there is some memorable scenes, like the scenes at the Chinese restaurant, where he doesn't like the sauce that was put in the egg foo young or something like that. And then a big shootout happens, and then once Charlie shoots at the ceiling, all of a sudden it starts raining cocaine, which eventually falls into a vase, and Rhys has to kind of like carry it with him everywhere he goes. So, while they're doing it, of course, they're also snorting some of that blow, like, oh yeah, that's good shit. Anyhow, yeah, there are a lot of espionage in there too. Chases take place, explosives, fire shots, and things like that. Even though it is low, even though it was, a high budget movie, it still was, it felt very low key into some terms. Maybe it was because of the fact that the movie was 90 minutes long, and I know a lot of these epical action movies take around pretty much near the 2 hour mark. This one, like I said, is only 92 minutes long. Another memorable scene took place at Rhys's apartment, so we had James and Charlie along with his girlfriend Caroline and some Pakistani woman. So they're all sitting there having dinner. All of a sudden, the Pakistani woman says something like "Rose," and all of a sudden he shoots her, saying that it was some kind of hidden subliminal message. And he also thinks that James's girlfriend is trying to kill him. And you know what? As much as I would have loved to see Charlie be wrong, he actually happens to be right. I mean, it turns out that Caroline is not this innocent, charming girlfriend he thought she was, and that she even goes so far as to shoot him in the shoulder, which causes him to have a big wound. And it also has led to believe that Caroline herself is actually behind this terrorist organization. So, yeah, you get that kind of a lot in this movie. I mean, when they get to the embassy, we have, I guess you could say a high-ranking official was, was not permitted to come out of her car. So, so then they kind of like cover up and say that there's some kind of like a power outage or some kind of a technical grip. But of course, she's not having any of this shit. She doesn't really know what the fuck is going on. Something a lot more dangerous than that. It also turns out that Caroline actually was a suicide bomber, and that she actually had one of those vests, with explosives. And so James, tries to reason with her. But then eventually it turns out that Rhys had to end up killing his ex-girlfriend. But at least the embassy got saved, and at least they managed to prevent the bomb from exploding. Even though it was met with complete ungratefulness by the top-ranking official, who said that she wanted to get anybody who was involved in this fired. I don't know if it's questionable if whether James Rhys actually keeps his job or got fired. I don't know. Anyhow, at least the the people at the embassy, nobody got killed. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of cliches too. Even like the assassins and the terrorists. These people seem like they don't even know how to aim. And you see that a lot in a lot of these action films that they could fire like 20, 30, hundreds of gunshots, but they can't even seem to target their own people. That the people who they're wishing to target. They seem to miss all the time. Whereas the protagonists just seem to have perfect aim. You know, it's things like that that can be frustrating at times. Can't we all just get along? The story is definitely, like I said, far from perfect, but it gets you where you want to go, which is alright. But it would have been downgraded to a B movie had it not been for Travolta starring in it. The speed of this film is similar in vein to another based-off film involving the transporter. It was a relief that it never took itself seriously, and the action is fast, furious, and the pacing was quick, that the time breezed by rather fast. There is a little plot twist, but because you're not paying much attention to it if you missed it. And I think I may have exploited the plot twist. Travolta definitely pulls no punches in every scene that he's in and shows a great enjoyment for being in this movie. And he was probably the only reason why this movie was really that good, because I thought most of the acting was pretty wooden. Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, although looks slick in his button-down suit, he spends most of the time at the very end and does very little but react and carry a vase of narcotics. There's a disturbing scene where he has to avoid the corpses that Travolta drops from above. It's supposed to be played with comic relief, but I found that scene to be, a little disturbing. It's both humorous and dark at the same time. But the chemistry between the two are also inferior to those of Mel Gibson and Danny Glover from the Lethal Weapon series. And although Travolta seems to be in pretty good tact, there's still Jonathan Rhys-Meyers just does not have that same equal appeal of being the straight-laced secret agent, because he's just way too straight-laced. At least Gibson and Glover actually seem to work out a pretty good partnership in the Lethal Weapon series. But in From Paris with Love, Myers and Travolta, there isn't really any, because Rhys-Meyers just doesn't lack the charm or the charisma. And we never really have much of a chance for a proper build-up. There is some genuine romantic chemistry between Rhys-Meyers and Kasia Smutniak as Caroline, but then we realized that it was all just a ruse, and in the end it turns out that Smutniak is the actual villain in this story. And now there's nothing wrong with having a female antagonist, who was in on this whole terrorist organization, and she was threatening to blow up the American embassy in France. We never get to actually fully explain why she joined. And Rhys-Meyers, well, his character, James Rhys, said that the only reason why he fell in love with Caroline was just random. He didn't really know the full thing about her, or who she was really working for. Especially when she gave him this rather cheap-looking copper-like ring to wear on his finger. It just never fully explains itself. And even though their scenes were brief, I was convinced they were partners. romantic partners. That was until Smutniak really starts to reveal herself. Smutniak, who's a Polish-born actress, is making her debut in a more high-profile American role. Under the direction of Pierre Morel, I thought he did a brilliant job with the action sequences, even though many of the scenes were overly inspired by The Matrix. There was way too much shaky camera, almost like the Bourne movies. That's enough to drive you crazy. This was like a continuation to Morel's other action romp, Taken. But unlike Taken, which stars Liam Neeson, this film shows no efforts in creating anything real. A lot of this stuff is surrealist bullshit, but it's good bullshit. It's a garbage movie, but then again, I've ate my share of junk food, including a Royale with cheese. It's pretty much a popcorn movie that lets your mind take a rest and lets you turn your mind off for 90 minutes straight. So yeah, this movie really did. Yeah, it really was mostly for a guilty pleasure. It was entertaining. It was fun to watch. John Travolta just pretty much had the time of his life here, and it shows. And I would actually recommend you to see this movie if you want. Just don't be surprised of the racial undertones and the somewhat offensive stuff that was said. This is a hard-boiled action film. A lot of swearing. A lot of fight scenes. A lot of death scenes. But still, it is worth to sit back, enjoy, and not try to take itself too seriously. So therefore, if I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, I would give From Paris with Love from 2010 a 7 out of 10. So I guess this ends my writer review for this week. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the 3 simple rules. Be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Kurad Writer saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.